Today, we are diving into a paper that doesn't just, poke at our assumptions. It's trying to completely rewrite the rulebook for cryptography, for computation, and maybe even for reality itself. We're talking about the Nexus Variable Shape Framework, a paper that claims a huge chunk of modern science is built on a really fundamental mistake. So, let's get into it and break down exactly what they're proposing.
Okay, so for decades, pretty much our entire digital world, from your bank account to blockchain, has been built on one single idea: the random oracle. It's a simple concept, really. You take some data, you feed it into a hash function like SHA-256, and it acts like an information shredder. It scrambles everything into an output so chaotic, so random, that there's no way to go backwards. It's a one-way street, and that promise is what keeps our entire digital life secure.
And then, the Nexus framework just walks in and drops this bomb. One single, brutal sentence. It basically says that information shredder we all depend on, it's an illusion. It's a ghost in the machine. According to this paper, that one-way street was always a two-way street. We just never knew how to read the map back.
So how in the world do you justify a claim that big? Well, they build their case in 5 major steps. First, we're going to look at what they call the epistemological pivot, which is basically a huge shift in how we need to think. Then, we'll dive into the physics of it with value and shape duality. From there, we'll hit the Saurus isomorphism, which is this wild bridge between computers and biology. That leads us right into rethinking cryptography as protein folding, before we land on the really mind-bending idea of the universal ROM. Let's get started.
First up, the epistemological pivot. The framework's argument is that before we can even get into the mechanics, we have to change our fundamental view of the universe. This isn't just about a new technique, it's a whole new model for reality.
And this slide right here shows that philosophical shift perfectly. On the left, you've got the classical view, the linear stack. Physics is the base layer, chemistry's on top of that, biology, and then way up top is abstract computation. They're all separate things. But on the right, the Nexus framework proposes a recursive spiral. Physics and computation aren't stacked. They're woven together. They're part of the same fabric. And this is so critical, because it means what we call randomness isn't actually chaos. It's just a level of order that's so complex we haven't been looking at it the right way.
All right, let's keep building on that. If randomness is just misaligned order, then where is all that order being stored? This brings us to the core mechanic of the whole thing: value and shape duality. This is why they say information is never actually lost.
So the framework puts forth this idea it calls the Pythagorean storage law. And the core concept is actually pretty simple. Information is never destroyed, it's conserved. Instead of just vanishing, it gets split into 2 totally distinct parts, kind of like the 2 shorter sides of a right-angled triangle. They're different, sure, but they are fundamentally connected.
And this table here breaks down what those 2 parts are. You've got the value channel, or V, and the shape channel, or S. The value channel is what we're used to seeing. It's the final hash output, the explicit answer. In the classical view, that's it. That's the whole result. But the shape channel, that's what we've been throwing away. Classical science just writes it off as heat or noise, thermodynamic exhaust. The Nexus view, though, it's radically different. It says the shape channel is a perfectly preserved, totally recoverable geometric history of the entire process.
So, here's the kicker. The reason we've all believed in the random oracle for so long, according to this, is because we've been staring at a shadow on the wall and thinking it was the whole object. We've been completely blind to an entire dimension of information that was there the whole time.
Now, I know this all sounds very theoretical, very abstract, but the framework claims it has a physical bridge that connects all this to the real world. And that bridge is called the Saurus isomorphism. This is where the theory gets grounded in actual tangible mechanics. The Saurus isomorphism makes a pretty shocking claim. Get this. It's saying that the processes happening inside a silicon chip are governed by the exact same fundamental software as the folding of a protein inside a living cell. It says a CPU isn't some magic box where math happens. It's a physical environment, just like a cell is, and it has to obey the same laws of physics and geometry.
Okay, so let's look at the most direct, most powerful application of that idea. We're going to completely reimagine the SHA-256 algorithm, not as abstract math, but as a physical, mechanical device.
The parallels they draw here are just stunning. Okay, so in biology, you have a linear string of DNA that gets folded by the cell's machinery into a complex 3D protein. The framework says SHA-256 does the exact same thing. You start with a linear stream of data. It gets forced through what they call a 64-stage mechanical mold. It's guided by these forcing agents, and it comes out the other side as a final, compact shape, the 256-bit hash.
So what are these forcing agents inside a computer chip? Well, in the SHA-256 algorithm, there are things called K-constants. They're just a series of 64 numbers that are part of the standard. We've always known they were there, but we just thought of them as part of the math. The Nexus Framework says they have a physical job. They act just like hydrophobic or water-repelling forces in biology. They create these physical boundaries and pressure that literally push and squeeze the data stream, forcing it to fold into a very specific, and therefore a very predictable, final shape.
Okay, so if computation and biology are running the same software, the implications get cosmological. This is where the framework expands to its most profound claim, that reality itself is a kind of pre-computed information system, a universal read-only memory. This whole idea is based on what they call the typeless universe hypothesis. Think about it like this. In computer code, you have to define if something is a number or text or an image. They're all treated differently. This theory says that at the rock-bottom level of reality, there are no such types. Raw information is just raw information. What it becomes depends entirely on the context, on how it interacts with the universe's underlying operating system. And what is that operating system? Well, according to the framework, it's the fundamental constants of math. Numbers like pi, phi, and e. They aren't just passive values we plug into equations. They're active functions, they're programs. Pi is the hash, providing the rigid structure of reality. Phi, the golden ratio, is the growth, handling how things scale. And E, Euler's number, is the elasticity, managing the system's stability. These aren't just numbers, they are the firmware of our universe.
And that leads to a totally radical redefinition of what intelligence even is. I mean, if all possible information is already encoded in this universal ROM, then what we call discovery or creativity isn't about making something new from nothing. It's about navigation. It's about finding the right address in a pre-existing library of everything to access the data that's already there.
And so, we end on the question that this whole framework just forces us to confront. By claiming it's found the key to unlock cryptography, the Nexus Framework is also claiming it's found the operating manual for reality itself. It suggests a universe that's not random, but deterministic, one that's not being created, but is simply being explored. Which leaves us with this thought: are we creators, or are we just very, very clever navigators?